England in the High Middle Ages includes the history of England between the Norman Conquest in 1066 and the death of King John, considered by some to be the last of the Angevin kings of England. In 1216, a disputed succession and victory at the Battle of Hastings led to the conquest of England by William of Normandy in 1066. This linked the crown of England with possessions in France and brought a new aristocracy to the country that dominated landholding, government and the church. They brought with them the French language and maintained the rule through a system of castles and the introduction of a feudal system of landholding. By the time of William's death in 1087, England formed the largest part of an Anglo-Norman empire, ruled by nobles with landholdings across England, Normandy and Wales. William's sons disputed succession to his lands, with William II emerging as ruler of England and much of Normandy. On his death in 1100, his younger brother claimed the throne as Henry I and defeated his brother Robert to reunite England and Normandy. Henry was a ruthless yet effective king, but after the death of his only male heir in the White Ship tragedy, he persuaded his barons to recognize his daughter Matilda as heir. When Henry died in 1135, her cousin Stephen of Blois had himself proclaimed king, leading to a civil war known as the Anarchy. Eventually Stephen recognized Matilda's son Henry as his heir, and when Stephen died in 1154, he succeeded as Henry II. Henry, considered the first Angevin king of England, had extensive holdings in France and asserted his authority over Wales, Scotland and Ireland. He clashed with his appointee to the Archbishopric of Canterbury, Thomas Becket, resulting in Becket's murder and Henry making a dramatic exhibition of penance. The later part of his reign was dominated by rebellions involving his sons and Philip II of France that forced him to accept his son Richard as sole heir. Richard acceded to the Angevin inheritance on Henry's death in 1189 and almost immediately departed on a crusade. On his return journey he was taken hostage in Germany and a huge ransom was paid in order to secure his release in 1194. He spent the remainder of his reign restoring his lands in France, dying in 1199. His younger brother John succeeded in England, and fought a successful war against Richard's nephew Arthur for control of the French possession. John's behavior led to rebellions by the Norman and Angevin barons that broke his control of the continental possessions. His attempt to retake Normandy and Anjou was defeated at the Battle of Bouvines. This weakened his position in England, eventually resulting in the treaty called Magna Carta, which limited royal power, and the First Barons' War. His death in 1216 is considered by some historians to mark the end of the Angevin period and the beginning of the Plantagenet dynasty. The Normans adopted many Anglo-Saxon governmental institutions, but the feudal system concentrated more power in the hands of the king and a small elite. The rights and roles of women became more sharply defined. Noble women remained significant cultural and religious patrons and played an important part in political and military events. During the 12th century, divisions between conquerors and the English began to dissolve, and they began to consider themselves superior to their Celtic neighbors. The conquest brought Norman and French churchmen to power. New reformed religious and military orders were introduced into England. By the early 13th century, the Church had largely won its argument for independence from the state, answering almost entirely to Rome. Pilgrimages were a popular religious practice, and accumulating relics became important for ambitious institutions. England played a prominent part in the Second, Third and Fifth Crusades. Between the 9th and 13th centuries, England went through the medieval warm period, a prolonged period of warmer temperatures that allowed poorer land to be brought into cultivation. Agricultural land became typically organized around manors. By the 11th century, a market economy was flourishing across much of England, while the eastern and southern towns were heavily involved in international trade. Many hundreds of new towns, some of them planned communities, were built, supporting the creation of guilds and charter fairs. Anglo-Norman warfare was characterized by attritional military campaigns of raids and seizure of castles. Naval forces enabled the transportation of troops and supplies, raids into hostile territory and attacks on enemy fleets. After the conquest, the Normans built timber motte and Balian ringwork castles in large numbers, which were replaced by stone buildings from the 12th century. The period has been used in a wide range of popular culture, including William Shakespeare's plays, Walter Scott's location of Robin Hood in the reign of Richard I, and his emphasis on the conflict between Saxons and Normans set the template for later fiction and film adaptations. Political history. Norman Conquest. In 1002, King Ethelred II of England married Emma, the sister of Richard II, Duke of Normandy. The son Edward the Confessor, who spent many years in exile in Normandy, succeeded to the English throne in 1042. This led to the establishment of a powerful Norman interest in English politics, as Edward drew heavily on his former hosts for support, bringing in Norman courtiers, soldiers, and clerics and appointing them to positions of power, particularly in the church. Childless and embroiled in conflict with the formidable Godwin, Earl of Wessex, and his sons, Edward may also have encouraged Duke William of Normandy's ambitions for the English throne. When King Edward died at the beginning of 1066, the lack of a clear heir led to a disputed succession in which several contenders laid claim to the throne of England. Edward's immediate successor was the Earl of Wessex, Harold Godwinson, the richest and most powerful of the English aristocrats. Harold was elected king by the White Majormot of England and crowned by the Archbishop of York, Ealdred, although Norman propaganda claimed the ceremony was performed by Stigand, the uncanonically elected Archbishop of Canterbury. Harold was immediately challenged by two powerful neighbouring rulers. Duke William claimed that he had been promised the throne by King Edward and that Harold had sworn agreement to this. King Harold III of Norway, commonly known as Harald Hardrada, also contested the succession. His claim to the throne was based on an agreement between his predecessor Magnus I of Norway and the earlier English king, Harthacnut, whereby if either died without heir, the other would inherit both England and Norway. William and Harold at once set about assembling troops and ships to invade England. Tostig Godwinson, brother of Harold, made a series of attacks in the north of England in early 1066 that may have been the beginning of a bid for the throne, but after defeat at the hands of Edwin and Morcar and a desertion of most of his followers, he threw his lot in with Harald Hardrada, who invaded northern England in early September. Harold defeated and killed Hardrada and Tostig at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. William invaded with an army of Norman followers and mercenaries. Harold marched south to meet him, but was defeated and killed at the Battle of Hastings on the 14th of October, and William's forces rapidly occupied the south of England. William I's major revolts followed, which William suppressed before intervening in the northeast of England, establishing Norman control of York and devastating the region. Once England had been conquered, the Normans faced many challenges in maintaining control. They were few in number compared to the native English population, including those from other parts of France. Historians estimate the number of Norman settlers at around 8,000. William's followers expected and received lands and titles in return for their service in the invasion. but William claimed ultimate possession of the land in England over which his armies had given him de facto control, and asserted the right to dispose of it as he saw fit. Henceforth, all land was held directly from the king in feudal tenure in return for military service. A Norman lord typically had properties located in a piecemeal fashion throughout England and Normandy, and not in a single geographic block. To find the lands to compensate his Norman followers, William initially confiscated the estates of all the English lords who had fought and died with Harold and redistributed part of the lands. These confiscations led to revolts, which resulted in more confiscations, a cycle that continued for 5 years after the Battle of Hastings. To put down and prevent further rebellions, the Normans constructed castles and fortifications in unprecedented numbers, initially mostly on the Motte and Bailey pattern. William and his barons also exercised tighter control over inheritance of property by widows and daughters, are often forcing marriages to Normans. Some Norman lords used England as a launching point for attacks into South and North Wales, spreading up the valleys to create new marcher territories. By the time of William's death in 1087, England formed the largest part of an Anglo-Norman empire, ruled over by a network of nobles with landholdings across England, Normandy, and Wales. England's growing wealth was critical in allowing the Norman kings to project power across the region, including funding campaigns along the frontiers of Normandy. At Christmas 1085, William ordered the compilation of a survey of the landholdings held by himself and by his vassals throughout the kingdom, organized by counties, a work now known as the Domesday Book. The listing for each county gives the holdings of each landholder, grouped by owners. The listings describe the holding, who owned the land before the conquest, its value, what the tax assessment was, and usually the number of peasants, ploughs, and any other resources the holding had. Towns were listed separately. All the English counties south of the River Tees and River Ribble are included, and the whole work seems to have been mostly completed by the 1st of August 1086, when the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records that William received the results and that all the chief magnates swore the Salisbury Oath, a renewal of their oaths of allegiance. William II. At the death of William the Conqueror in 1087, his lands were divided into 2 parts. His Norman lands went to the eldest son Robert Curthose and his English lands to the younger William Rufus. This presented a dilemma for those nobles who held land on both sides of the waterway of the English Channel, who decided to unite England and Normandy once more under one ruler. The pursuit of this aim led them to revolt against William in favor of Robert in the rebellion of 1088, under the leadership of the powerful Bishop Odo of Bayeux, who was a half-brother of William the Conqueror. As Robert failed to appear in England to rally his supporters, William won the support of the English lords with silver and promises of better government, and defeated the rebellion. In 1091 he invaded Normandy, crushing Robert's forces and forcing him to cede a portion of his lands. The two made up the differences, and William agreed to help Robert recover lands lost to the King of France, notably Le Maine. This plan was later abandoned, but William continued to pursue a ferociously warlike defense of his French possessions and interests, exemplified by his response to the attempt by Elias de la Flèche, Count of Maine, to take Le Mans in 1099. William came into conflict with Anselm, Archbishop of Canterbury, over Gregorian reforms in the Church. Eventually Anselm went into exile and Pope Urban II, involved in a major conflict with the Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV, came to a concordat with William, whereby William recognized Urban as pope, and Urban gave sanction to the Anglo-Norman ecclesiastical status quo. Anselm remained in exile, and William was able to claim the revenues of the Archbishop of Canterbury to the end of his reign. William died while hunting in 1100. Henry I, despite Robert's rival claims, his younger brother Henry immediately seized power in England. Robert, who invaded in 1101, disputed Henry's control of England. This military campaign ended in a negotiated settlement that confirmed Henry as king. The peace was short-lived, and Henry invaded the Duchy of Normandy in 1105 and 1106, finally defeating Robert at the Battle of Tinchebray. Henry kept Robert imprisoned for the rest of his life. Henry's control of Normandy was challenged by Louis VI of France, Baldwin of Flanders and Fulk of Anjou, who promoted the rival claims of Robert's son, William Clito, and supported a major rebellion in the duchy between 1116 and 1119. Following Henry's victory at the Battle of Bray-Mule, a favourable peace settlement was agreed with Louis in 1120. Considered by contemporaries to be a harsh but effective ruler, Henry skillfully manipulated the barons in England and Normandy. In England, he drew on the existing Anglo-Saxon system of justice, local government and taxation, but also strengthened it with additional institutions, including the Royal Exchequer and itinerant justices. Normandy was also governed through a growing system of justices and an exchequer. Many of the officials that ran Henry's system were new men, relatively low-born individuals who rose through the ranks as administrators. Henry encouraged ecclesiastical reform, but from 1101 he also became embroiled in a serious dispute with Archbishop Anselm, which was resolved through a compromise solution in 1105. He supported the Cluniac order and played a major role in the selection of the senior clergy in England and Normandy. Stephen, Matilda and the anarchy. Henry's only legitimate son, William, died aboard the White Ship in the disaster of 1120, sparking a fresh succession crisis. Henry named his daughter Matilda as his heir, but on Henry's death in 1135 her cousin Stephen of Blois had himself proclaimed king. Matilda's husband Geoffrey, Count of Anjou, showed little interest in England, but he supported Matilda by entering Normandy to claim her inheritance. Matilda landed in England to challenge Stephen and was declared Lady of the English, which resulted in a civil war called the Anarchy. Stephen was defeated and captured at the Battle of Lincoln, and Matilda was the effective ruler. When Matilda was forced to release Stephen in a hostage exchange for her half-brother Robert, 1st Earl of Gloucester, Stephen was recrowned. The conflict in England continued inconclusively. However, Geoffrey secured the Duchy of Normandy. Matilda's son, Henry II, by his marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine, had acquired the Duchy of Aquitaine and was now immensely rich. With skillful negotiation with the war-weary barons of England and King Stephen, he agreed to the Treaty of Wallingford and was recognized as Stephen's heir. Angevin's Henry II. After Stephen's death in 1154, Henry succeeded as the first Angevin king of England, so called because he was also the Count of Anjou in northern France, adding it to his extensive holdings in Normandy and Aquitaine. England became a key part of a loose-knit assemblage of lands spread across Western Europe, later termed the Angevin Empire. Henry asserted his authority over Brittany, even reorganizing the duchy into 8 administrative districts and introducing Angevin legal reforms. He pursued an aggressive policy in Wales, reclaiming lands lost by Anglo-Norman princes and conducting 4 punitive campaigns against Welsh princes that resulted in the submission to his authority. This underlined his overlordship, but he did not attempt a direct conquest. When the Scottish King William the Lion joined the rebellion of Henry's sons and was captured, it allowed Henry to extract homage from the Scottish king under the Treaty of Falaise, which he did not pursue directly, but which would provide a justification for later interventions in Scottish kingship. In the mid-12th century, Ireland was ruled by local kings, although their authority was more limited than the counterparts in the rest of Western Europe. In the 1160s, deposed King Diarmait Mac Murchard, King of Leinster, turned to Henry for assistance in 1167, and the English king agreed to allow Diarmait to recruit mercenaries within his empire. Diarmait put together a force of Anglo-Norman and Flemish mercenaries drawn from the Welsh marches, including Richard de Clare, known as Strongbow. With his new supporters, he reclaimed Leinster but died shortly afterwards in 1171. De Clare then claimed Leinster for himself. Henry took this opportunity to intervene personally in Ireland, landing in October 1171. Henry's timing was influenced by several factors, including encouragement from Pope Alexander, who saw the opportunity to establish papal authority over the Irish Church. Henry's intervention was initially successful, with both the Irish and Anglo-Normans in the south and east of Ireland accepted his rule. However, the Treaty of Windsor in 1175, under which Rory O'Connor would be recognised as the High King of Ireland, giving homage to Henry and maintaining stability on the ground on his behalf, meant that he had little direct control. Henry saw an opportunity to re-establish what he saw as his rights over the Church in England by reasserting the privileges held by Henry I when Theobald, Archbishop of Canterbury, died, by appointing his friend Thomas Becket to the post. Henry had clashed with the Church over whether bishops could excommunicate royal officials without his permission and whether he could try clerics, without them appealing to Rome. However, Becket opposed Henry's constitutions of Clarendon and fled into exile. Relations later improved, allowing Becket's return, but soon soured again when Becket saw the crowning as co-regent of Henry's son by the Archbishop of York as a challenge to his authority and excommunicated those who had offended him. On hearing the news, Henry uttered the infamous phrase, "What miserable drones and traitors have I nurtured and promoted in my household, who let their lord be treated with such shameful contempt by a low-born clerk." In response to please Henry, 3 of his men murdered Becket in Canterbury Cathedral, probably by misadventure after Becket resisted a botched arrest attempt. In Christian Europe, Henry was considered complicit in this crime, making him a pariah, and he was forced to make a dramatic exhibition of penance, publicly walking barefoot into the cathedral and allowing monks to scourge him. When Henry II attempted to give his landless youngest son, John, a wedding gift of 3 castles, it prompted his 3 eldest sons and wife to rebel in the revolt of 1173 to 1174. Louis VII encouraged the 3 elder sons to destabilize his mightiest subject and not to wait for their inheritances. It was only after 18 months of conflict that Henry II was able to force the rebels to submit to his authority. In Le Mans in 1182, Henry II gathered his children to plan for partial inheritance in which his eldest son, also called Henry, would inherit England, Normandy and Anjou, Richard the Duchy of Aquitaine, Geoffrey Brittany and John would receive Ireland. This broke down into further conflict and the younger Henry rebelled again, but died of dysentery. In 1186 Geoffrey died as a result of a tournament accident, but Henry was still reluctant to have a sole heir, so in 1189, Richard and Philip II of France took advantage of a sickening Henry II with more success. success. Henry II was forced to accept humiliating peace terms, including naming Richard as sole heir. When Henry II died shortly afterwards, his last words to Richard were allegedly, "God grant that I may not die until I have my revenge on you." Richard I. On the day of Richard's English coronation, there was a mass slaughter of the Jews, described by Richard of Devizes as a Holocaust. Quickly putting the affairs of the Angevin Empire in order, he departed on crusade to the Middle East in early 1190. In Sicily he came into conflict with Tancred I over the rights of Richard's sister Queen Joan, widow of the former King William II of Sicily. Richard captured the city of Messina on the 4th of October 1190 and using it to force Tancred into a peace agreement. When his sister and his fiancée Berengaria, along with several other ships, including the treasure ship, were seized by the island's despot Isaac Komnenos, Richard conquered the island, which became a Western feudal and Christian base in the Mediterranean. Opinions of Richard amongst his contemporaries were mixed. He had rejected and humiliated the King of France's sister, insulted and refused spoils of the Third Crusade to nobles like Leopold V, Duke of Austria, and was rumoured to have arranged the assassination of Conrad of Montferrat. His cruelty was demonstrated by his massacre of 2,600 prisoners in Acre. However, Richard was respected for his military leadership and courtly manners. He achieved victories in the Third Crusade but failed to capture Jerusalem, retreating from the Holy Land with a small band of followers. Richard was captured by Leopold on his return journey in 1192. Custody was passed to Henry the Lion, and a tax of 25% of movables and income was required in England to pay the ransom of 100,000 marks, with a promise of 50,000 more, before Richard was released in 1194. In his absence, Philip II of France had overrun much of Normandy, while John of England controlled much of the remainder of Richard's lands. On his return to England, Richard forgave John and re-established his control, leaving England in 1194 never to return. Richard battled Philip for the next 5 years for the return of the holding ceased during his incarceration. Close to total victory, he was injured by an arrow during the siege of Château de Chalais-Chabrol and died after lingering injured for 10 days. John Richard's failure in his duty to provide an heir caused a succession crisis. Anjou, Brittany, Maine and Touraine chose Richard's nephew and nominated heir Arthur, while John succeeded in England and Normandy. Yet again, Philip II of France took the opportunity to destabilize the Plantagenet territories on the European mainland, supporting his vassal Arthur's claim to the English crown. When Arthur's forces threatened his mother, John won a significant victory, capturing the entire rebel leadership at the Battle of Marbo. Arthur was murdered, it was rumored, by John's own hands, and his sister Eleanor would spend the rest of her life in captivity. John's behavior drove numerous French barons to side with Philip. The resulting rebellions by the Norman and Angevin barons broke John's control of the continental possessions, leading to the de facto end of the Angevin Empire, even though Henry III would maintain the claim until 1259. After re-establishing his authority in England, John planned to retake Normandy and Anjou. The strategy was to draw the French from Paris while another army, under Otto IV, Holy Roman Emperor, attacked from the north. However, his allies were defeated at the Battle of Bouvines in one of the most decisive and symbolic battles in French history. The battle had both important and high-profile consequences. John's nephew Otto retreated and was soon overthrown, while King John agreed to a 5-year truce. Philip's decisive victory was crucial in ordering politics in both England and France. The battle was instrumental in forming the absolute monarchy in France. John's defeats in France weakened his position in England. The rebellion of his English vassals resulted in the treaty called Magna Carta, which limited royal power and established common law. This would form the basis of every constitutional battle through the 13th and 14th centuries. However, both the barons and the crown failed to abide by the terms of Magna Carta, leading to the First Barons' War, in which the rebel barons invited an invasion by Prince Louis. This is considered by some historians to mark the end of the Angevin period and the beginning of the Plantagenet dynasty with John's death and William Marshall's appointment as the protector of the 9-year-old Henry III. Marshall won the war with victories at the battles of Lincoln and Dover in 1217, leading to the Treaty of Lambeth, by which Louis renounced his claims. In victory, the Marshall Protectorate reissued the Magna Carta Agreement as a basis for future government.